Chapter 11, Flying Lessons. Tilde tilde asterisk Aaron asterisk tilde tilde. Magic is all around us. It exists in air, in water, and in the ground itself. Magic is simply everywhere. Or, at least, that's what page 1 of Beginner's Magic Exercises had told her. With Twilight away at Canterlot, and with her wings still not working, Erin decided to do a little self-study and hope that she could get started using magic on her own. The book was easy to understand, at least, though, she opted not to follow the book's suggestion of making sure a parent or teacher was present before trying to gather energy. According to the book, Erin had to think, but don't think too hard, about her horn filling up with magic. If done right, the book told her, then her horn should start feeling tingly after a while. Like a leg that needs stretching, had been the way it was described. So far, after an hour of lying on her couch while staring at nothing in particular and trying to both relax and concentrate at the same time, the only thing she felt was an encroaching headache. It didn't help Erin's mood that a long and restless night had led to her giving up on sleep before the sun was even up. Then her run had been even slower and more painful than it had been the day before, leading to her staggering into her house once again with every muscle on fire. And now, here she was just before noon, unable to even manage a false horn illumination spell. It was beyond frustrating, to say the least. Not even the successful manufacture of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for breakfast had turned her mood around for long, as it had only served to remind her that she still couldn't use basic unicorn magic. Erin sighed and pushed herself off of her couch, which, after the last few nights of her sleeping on it, was now in severe need of pony hair removal. She was just debating what to do with the rest of her day when a sharp pounding came from her front door. Erin froze, surprise fading into nervousness. Whoever it was knocking sounded impatient, or possibly angry. She approached the door slowly, worried that it might be Meadowlark come to bite her head off for the previous night. It was a huge relief to hear Rainbow Dash's voice through the front door. Hey, Erin, you in there? Erin popped the door open, a grin already on her face. Hey, Rainbow, good what's that? Rainbow Dash grinned and held up what looked like some sort of harness, along with straps, buckles and some padding. What's it look like? Erin tried desperately to come up with something to head off her first guess and failed utterly. Some sort of pony bondage gear, she ventured. Rainbow's grin vanished as her mouth dropped open in shock. No, what? No, why would? This is an assistant's harness. She shook the thing furiously at Erin's face. Why would you even think I'd have something like that? Erin started giggling. Sorry, I still have no idea what that is, though. Dash was starting to recover, though her face was still redder than normal. It's a harness designed for one Pegasus to help another out with flying. You know, if they're injured or whatever, to help get them back in the air faster. It took a few seconds for those words to sink in. Erin took in a deep breath and said, with a very thin veneer of calm overlaying a rising torrent of excitement, do you mean you're going to take me flying, Rainbow Dash? Well, I figured, just because your wings don't work so hot, that doesn't mean we can't start on the basics. I know you've got Pegasus magic, or you couldn't have walked on clouds, so that's where we can. Erin launched herself into Rainbow's chest, sweeping her up in a huge hug. Thank you. Hey, yeah, Dash said, pushing awkwardly with her forehooves to try and pry Erin off of her. Don't mention it, okay? After finally allowing Rainbow to free herself, Erin grinned and said, when do we start? Rainbow grinned back. Does right now work for you? Erin gaped at her. Are you kidding? You're not kidding. She squealed and did a little jump. Yes, now works for me. Cool, let's go. Erin, radiating excited giggles, followed Rainbow out the front door. Tilde asterisk rose quartz asterisk tilde. You could tell a lot about what an office was like just by listening when you walk into it. This particular office, the administrative wing of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, was mostly silent except for the rustling of papers, the click-clack of typewriters, and the distant murmuring conversations between the ponies working there. The conversations were quick, efficient and, above all, quiet. It was an office that was dedicated to very serious business, and the ponies that worked there treated it as such. Rose Quartz looked around her desk, feeling a little lost. Piles of paperwork were stacked up in a tray marked in, which was next to a woefully empty out tray. The pencil holder, a brightly painted clay cylinder, was filled with quills and pencils. Other items on her desk included an inkwell, pencil sharpener, stapler and a variety of stamps resting on covered ink pads. A typewriter sat on its own small stand to her left. Behind her was a filing cabinet, which she checked briefly just a moment earlier. It was filled with folders, each of which was full to bursting with papers. The chair was comfortable, at least. Rose reclined and stretched, trying to work out some kinks in her upper back, after which it was back to staring at the top of her desk while trying to connect what it was she was supposed to do with her day. Rosie. The mare that had said her name was a slightly heavy-set earth pony with a brown coat and a light green mane. She was trotting up with sparkling eyes and a huge smile. Welcome back from your vacation. Do anything fun? Hey, Minty. Rose shook her head. Nothing much, really. Sat around reading, mostly. Whoa, you kicked out all the stops. Minty reared up on her hind legs and stuck her elbows on the edge of Rose's desk, cradling her chin on top of her hooves. I thought you were going to travel out of town or something. Seriously, you're so boring without me around. Rose offered a small and apologetic smile. It seemed the right thing to do at that moment. Some of the ponies around the pair of them looked up from their work with disapproving frowns, and Rose found herself desperately hoping that Minty would tone her energy down a little bit. So, guess what? Rose blinked. What? Minty waggled her eyebrows. Come on, you've got a guess. We get to go back to the human world, Rose said. Minty just gaped at her. The director stopped by and mentioned it this morning. We're leaving when the next gate opens up in a month. Well, dang. Minty scowled. I was hoping to surprise you. Oh well. The mayor shrugged and chuckled. I can still surprise you with this much, though. Keep it hush hush, but apparently we're going back on a weekly schedule with the gateway. Rose blinked. Really? Well, that's good news. So, we're leaving this weekend. Yeah, Minty's brows lowered a little. I expected you to be more excited. Didn't you enjoy your last trip to Earth? Rose blinked before smiling. You know I did. Well, I wanted to plan things out a bit more, this time. What do you mean? Well, more meeting important humans and seeing important sights and less. Well, less shopping and goofing around, honestly. Minty snorted. You sick or something? I thought you loved shopping. You sure didn't complain while we were over there the first time. I know, Rose Quartz shrugged. I just thought, well, it may be a good idea to take things more seriously this time. Well, I suppose, if it bugs you that much. Minty shrugged. We can still do some shopping, right? Rose considered that for a while before relenting with a nod and a small smile. As long as it isn't excessive. I'd like to see human commerce in action again. Minty chuckled. Commerce in action is a nice way to put it. So, lunch. Rose stared blankly for a moment. What about it? Oh, no thanks. Not really hungry at the moment. I think I'll stay here and try to get back into the swing of things. You know, vacation and all. Minty's face scrunched up into an expression that Rose recognized as concern. I was just kidding before, but I have to ask. You didn't get sick when you were on vacation, did you? Rose smiled. No, I'm just fine. Maybe a little tired, that's all. First it was the diplomatic trip to Earth, then my vacation. It's hard to come back to work after a week off, you know. I get that. Never as long as you want it to be, right? Rose was about to answer when a booming male voice spared her the need to. The director was marching down the aisle, his horn blowing with a voice amplification spell. All right, everypony, we get a small break today. Princess Celestia is addressing everypony grade 18 and above in the big auditorium in half an hour. Pack up what you're working on and assemble out front. Rose and Minty watched as the stallion trotted away, repeating his message as he went. What do you think that's about? Rose asked. What do you think? Minty asked. When Rose just stared at her blankly, the mayor scoffed and said, the schedule change for the Earth Gateway, duh. Oh. Makes sense. Rose hopped out of her chair and smiled at the taller mayor. Shall we get going? Sounds good. Minty kept up a cheerful monologue while the pair of them walked out of the office. Rose only listened with half an ear as she chewed her bottom lip. Things were moving a bit faster than she'd expected. She thought she'd have more time to research and plan the next trip out. After all, she had better things to do than go shopping while on Earth. Still, Rose decided, that was something she could worry about later. For now, she slipped on a smile and trotted off after the chattering Minty, while idly wondering if the gateway was the only thing Celestia was going to be talking about. Celestia**. The murmur of voices in the grand hall was getting steadily louder as the clock ticked closer and closer to the time for the announcement. The two royal sisters were standing side by side behind a red velvet curtain, waiting until the hall filled to capacity. Luna shifted her weight from one forehoof to another while muttering something under her breath. Celestia looked over to see her younger sister staring blankly at the bottom of the curtain with a scowl on her face and her ears flat against her skull. When Celestia brushed a wing across her back, Luna jumped slightly and reared her head back. Are you all right, Luna? I am fine, Luna said, her voice clipped. She looked back and forth before sighing. I am not certain that this is wise, she said quietly. The ponies do not respect me as they do you. There may be trouble. Celestia arched an eyebrow. What kind of trouble could there possibly be? There shall certainly be a clamor over this announcement. Perhaps even an uproar. Luna's eyes widened. What if they react poorly? What if the announcement leads to unrest which leads in turn to a riot? They may swarm the stage and murder me. Celestia snorted. Nopony is going to murder you, Luna, I promise that. Luna looked away with a sullen pout. Later tonight, when Canterlot is burning and the unruly mobs rampage through the streets, I shall try to avoid saying, I told you so. I thought you were planning on being murdered, Celestia said, chuckling at the annoyed look that Luna shot at her. Everything will be fine, Luna. I'll stand with you the whole way. Ponies don't like change, sister, Luna pointed out. And you must admit, this is a fairly large change. It is. But, given time, I just know the ponies will come to love you just as deeply as I do. Celestia was glad to see that her statement had managed to bring out a small, if strained, smile onto Luna's face. That smile vanished when one of the royal staff stepped up and cleared his throat. Princesses. They are ready for you. Thank you, clear thought. We'll be right out. Celestia turned to Luna to offer some last-minute encouragement, only to hesitate when she saw her sister staring at her. What? You knew that Stallion's name, Luna said, her voice faint. Yes. You know every pony's name. Luna's eyes widened and her wings flared slightly. I do not. I don't know any pony's names. They are not going to like me. They shall think me rude or arrogant. She brought a hoof up to cover her mouth as she gasped. Or both. Luna, you're panicking, Celestia said flatly. Stop it. We are not panicking. Luna very nearly shouted. Our reaction is perfectly normal in these circumstances. You've slipped back into the royal, Celestia pointed out. She sighed and stepped forward, bringing her sister into a firm hug with one ivory wing. I will be with you every step of the way, I promise. Even when the ponies decide to defeather, tar, and re-feather me. I'd never allow it. Besides, they would have to do that to me, first, Celestia assured her. I'm going to be awful, I just know it. Nonsense. You know what you're going to say, right? Celestia nodded at the stack of note cards sitting on a nearby table. You have all of the notes that you and Twilight worked out last night, don't you? Yes. Twilight Sparkle was very kind to assist me with my speech. She helped me considerably with modern vernacular. Luna frowned uncertainly at the towering stack of cards. I am just uncertain about the current length. Well, make sure to bring them with you, Celestia said, hugging her sister once again. Come along, now, our subjects await. Luna took a deep breath, released it, and nodded. Very well, then. On stage, Clear Thought was announcing them. It was time to go. Together, the two sisters walked out onto the stage in order to address their subjects. Twilight**. Le Bal de Foin was one of Twilight's favorite restaurants in Canterlot, and its reputation was impressive enough for Rarity to squeal in delight when Twilight had stopped by to invite her to lunch. After a short walk, and a much longer wait for a clean table, the two friends found themselves sitting at a small table outside of the restaurant, enjoying both the breeze and the shade provided by the white parasol that blocked the early afternoon sun. Rarity had barely been seated before she said, "Tell me all about it. What happened?" Twilight shifted uncomfortably on her seat, a thick cushion set on top of the grass. Well, Celestia talked first. She said some things about how happy she is to be our princess, and how much joy it gives her every day to see us healthy and happy. And then she told them about Verdant. Ooh. Rarity leaned forward, eyes sparkling. I bet the audience just loved that. The existence of yet another alicorn. Twilight snorted. Yeah, that caused a few waves. I can only imagine, Rarity said. Did they seem upset, or just curious? Mostly curious. They asked if he came from the human world, like Eren, and Celestia said no, that he was from Equestria, but that she wasn't currently at liberty to say what his origins were. Twilight shrugged and rolled her eyes. A few of the press started shouting questions, like if he were her baby, or Luna's, or Cadence's. Which is just silly. Cadence is still pregnant with my niece. Rarity looked surprised at that. Oh, it's a girl. Cadence thinks so. Shiny wants a boy, though. Twilight waved a hoof and shook her head. That's nothing to the reaction she got when she said she was turning the government over to Luna. I've never heard a gasp so loud. If she were to be honest, Twilight had been pleased with that reaction. It showed that she wasn't unique in being completely blindsided by the idea of Princess Celestia becoming less active in government. I can only imagine, Rarity said. I was simply shocked when you told me last night. Yeah. But I think I've come to grips with it. Twilight grimaced and looked at her menu, not willing to look her friend in the eye after saying something that was disturbingly close to a lie. You should try the Panais avec sauce au beurre, Rarity. I think you would like it. Rarity glanced at her own menu with a contemplative frown. I need to take off a pound or two, so I was thinking of a nice, simple salad. You're dieting. Twilight looked her friend over. You look fine, you don't need to lose weight. Perhaps, Rarity said with a dainty sniff. However, being surrounded by fashion models all day yesterday gave my self-image a good thrashing. Rarity, you look as good as any of them. She meant it sincerely, and Rarity laughed and patted her hoof, but Twilight wasn't sure if the other unicorn truly accepted what she said or not. The waiter came out, then, to take the drink order. Twilight asked for an apple juice, while Rarity requested a sparkling mineral water with lime. The waiter left them with a basket of fresh, warm rolls, which got Twilight's stomach rumbling. She quickly nabbed one of the rolls in her magic, split it, and spread a little butter on it. Rarity, who had spared a longing look at the basket, turned back to Twilight. And what happened after that? There were tons of questions, of course, Twilight said after swallowing her first bite of her roll. Celestia let them run the course, then calmly told them that more information would be forthcoming, but that this wasn't a question and answer session. Oh, my. I bet they didn't like that. Well, she put it more diplomatically than I did, Twilight said with a shrug. Anyway, she said a few more comforting things, which did manage to calm everybody down, and then she turned it over to Luna. Twilight tore what was left of her roll in half and popped one half into her mouth. And what happened then? Rarity asked. She giggled when Twilight rolled her eyes at her. Sorry, of course you can wait until you finish chewing, I'm just eager to hear it all. Well, I told you that I was going to help Luna with her speech, right? After Rarity nodded, Twilight continued. Well, I spent half the night with her, writing everything up on index cards. And then she didn't even use them. Darling, you're pouting, Rarity chided. I am not pouting, Twilight said in her most rational tone of voice, which for some reason got a smirk out of Rarity. I just don't know why I put all that effort into a comprehensive speech if she's not even going to use the cards. Did you ask her about it after the audience? Rarity asked, still holding on to her smirk. I did. She said it would have taken too long, and she just wanted to get it over with. Twilight grabbed another roll from the basket and tore it into pieces before slathering butter on the mangled remains. Glad I spent all that time helping her. How long would the speech have been? Rarity asked, her eyes following the floating bits of bread roll as Twilight ate one after another. Twilight held up a hoof and took a sip of water before answering. About half an hour, if she got through it smoothly. She scowled at the table. It would have answered so many questions the reporters had if she just stuck to the speech. Well, she's a princess, Rarity said in what Twilight felt was an insufferably reasonable tone. They're known for doing things their own way. Twilight was about to answer when they were interrupted again as the waiter brought out the drinks, then efficiently and politely took their order before disappearing once again. And, whatever Rarity had said, Twilight wasn't pouting. Now you're sulking, Rarity said once the waiter was out of earshot. No, I'm not. Twilight cleared her throat, blushing as half of the restaurant looked her way. I'm just a little upset, is all. She glared at her friend, then noticed that Rarity was still wistfully eyeing the bread basket on the table between them. With a smug grin, she picked up another roll, spread some butter on it, and then levitated it back and forth across the table. Rarity's eyes followed it the whole way, causing Twilight to laugh for the first time since the princess audience. Rarity, you're obviously hungry. Just take a roll. You'll feel better, and maybe be a little less snippy. But my diet. She cut off when Twilight levitated the roll over towards her. Oh, you are such a bad influence, Twilight Sparkle, she said, chuckling as her magic took the roll. Rarity barely managed to maintain her ladylike air as she tore into the roll, though the groan of pure delight almost pushed her over the line. Twilight smiled and picked up the thread of her story once again. Luna did the rest of the announcements. We'll be opening the Gate to Earth weekly, starting this weekend. I mean, we were planning on opening it this weekend anyway, since we have the cultural exchange students coming over, but now we'll tell the humans that they can open it every weekend. That's wonderful. Rarity said, helping herself to the last roll in the basket. Twilight watched it go mournfully. She also announced the creation of the Dream Guard. Or, the recreation, I guess. Twilight grinned as her eyes sparkled. A whole new school of magic. And she'll teach me the spells first. You mentioned that last night. But what does the Dream Guard actually do? Their primary duty consists of casting and maintaining a dreamward spell. In the event of the ward failing, they cast a spell to go into a trance, enter the dream realm, and stop whatever creature is causing trouble. Rarity shivered. Are there really creatures that attack us while we're dreaming? That doesn't seem very fair. According to Luna, they're very rare. Plus, ponies have natural defenses, but they can cause nasty nightmares. Twilight smiled. Sort of like fighting off a flu and getting a fever, I suppose. Still, that's very disturbing. The waiter showed up then with a tray held in his telekinetic grip. He set their food on the table and left a moment later, promising refills on the drinks in a little while. Twilight quickly dug into her meal of pasta parmesan, and a side salad with vinaigrette dressing and little cherry tomatoes. She also made a mental note to check her breath after eating the garlic bread that came with it. After a few seconds of eating, she realized Rarity wasn't joining in, instead staring morosely at her dressing-free salad. You sure you don't want anything else, Rarity? Twilight asked. She lifted up the small plate that held her bread. You can have this, if you want. I'm gonna be stuffed if I try to eat everything I ordered. Thank you, darling, but no. Rarity sighed and lifted a forkful of lettuce to her mouth. The things I do for fabulosity. They ate in silence for a few minutes. For Twilight, it was time to gather her thoughts and try to sort out her feelings. There was something about the audience earlier that day that had bothered her, but she just couldn't put her hoof on it. So, was there anything else? Rarity asked suddenly, dispelling the silence. A little bit, Twilight said. She also reiterated that Erin is not a real alicorn, since I guess there's been a lot of speculation in the news about it. Now, see, that confuses me, Rarity said. I had always thought that an alicorn was simply a pony who had all 3 types of pony magic. Is that not the case? Well, not exactly. Twilight sat up straighter, her ears perking up as she remembered the conversation she'd had with Celestia the previous day where she'd asked a similar question. Erin's magic is compartmentalized. It's like each magic type is separate, distinct. And the princesses aren't like that? Rarity asked. Twilight shook her head. No, the 3 types of magic actually combine into one magic. That allows for greater flexibility in its use. Not to mention, each type of magic enhances the other 2, which greatly increases an alicorn's raw abilities. I never knew that. That would explain why Celestia and Luna are so much stronger than average ponies, I suppose. You got it. But that's not all. You know how a pony's magic will oftentimes line up with their special talent. Like mine with gems, I imagine, Rarity said with a nod. I know that location spells like that would be much too difficult for me, ordinarily. That's right. Your special talent gives you a boost in that regard. Twilight smiled, enjoying having such an attentive listener. But, for alicorns, the effect is much, much greater. Then there are additional talents. Like Luna's dreamwalking, for example. Any pony with the right skills can enter the dream realm, but only Luna can actually enter a pony's dream if she wants to. That's a skill unique to her. Even a very powerful unicorn wouldn't be able to do that. I wonder what Celestia's alicorn talent is, Rarity asked while drinking her sparkling water. Well, I asked her about it, and it seems like she has a few. Twilight tapped a hoof on her chin as she recalled the previous night's conversation. She can manipulate light, control any open flames, and can control gravity in a highly localized area. And, like Luna, she has a gift for limited foresight. Well, that's very impressive. Rarity smiled as she skewered a cucumber on her fork. Not unexpected for our princess, though. The smile fell away. What did you mean by foresight? Twilight smiled. She spent the next few minutes describing how some ponies in history had been able to see the future, at least to an extent. She listed some of the most famous, from Eagle Eye the Griffin, to Shademist, to Clearsight the Seer. The book that she'd used to predict the return of Nightmare Moon had been a collection of visions called Predictions and Prophecies, containing prophecies from many different sources. As the meal went on and Rarity poked morosely at her salad, Twilight happily continued to expound on the differences between limited and unlimited foresight. Limited tends to be far more accurate, but only focuses on events in the next few months. Unlimited means that the events could be taking place in the far distant future. She took another bite of her pasta before continuing after a hasty swallow. Also, the unlimited variety tends to be frustratingly vague. Most times, there's no way of knowing for certain what it means until after the events have happened. That's fascinating, Twilight, Rarity said with a smile, though her eyes seemed a little glassy. Are you all right, Rarity? Quite all right, dear. She blinked a few times and smiled again. Not to change the subject, but I'm wondering how you are holding up. Me. Twilight sat back on her cushion, frowning. I'm fine. Why do you ask? Well, you know Princess Celestia better than most anyone. She's been your teacher for years. I have to imagine that this little semi-retirement of hers must be. Rarity twirled her fork in the air for a moment while she hunted for the right word to use. Quote ... Upsetting, to you. What? PFFT, no. Twilight waved a hoof dismissively. No, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? Everything's just peachy. I mean, it's just a little time off of work, and I'm sure Celestia's earned a little vacation after all these centuries, right? I mean, just because she's taken this time to spend with Verdant, it doesn't mean that she's any less my teacher. Twilight laughed, shifting uncomfortably on her cushion. I mean, sure, she's going to be spending less time with me, because Verdant will have to come first. And, granted, she never took time off of being a princess to spend time with me, but I'm not a little foal, right? I mean, I was a foal way back then, but I wasn't an infant, so it's different, right? It's not like I have any reason to be jealous. Twilight's voice ran down as the words she was saying filtered back into her head. Rarity was sitting calmly across from her with a sympathetic look on her face. Oh my goodness, I'm jealous of a little foal. Twilight groaned and lowered her head to the table. I'm a terrible pony, Twilight. Rarity said sharply, causing Twilight to raise her head in surprise. You are not a terrible pony. Trust me on this. But I'm jealous of Verdant. True. But your feelings don't make you good or bad. How you act upon them does. Rarity smiled. And you've been supportive of Celestia's decision, even though it means you now have to share her as a teacher. I think that speaks volumes for your character, darling. Twilight smiled wanly back. Thanks, Rarity. Please, don't mention it. Rarity said loftily. I do have one last question, however. Okay. Rarity pushed aside her half-empty salad bowl. Are you going to finish your garlic bread? Twilight laughed and lifted the plate with the bread over to her friend. Tilde tilde asterisk Erin asterisk tilde tilde. Rainbow set a quick pace. Erin, already a little worn out from her morning workout, grimaced and clenched her teeth, determined to keep up with her Pegasus friend, who was trotting along and chattering away, without even a shortness of breath to show she was exercising. Erin, struggling not to pant, thought ruefully about how much she'd lost in becoming a pseudo-alicorn. Hopefully, once she fully realized her Earth pony magic, she'd get her speed and endurance back. The pair of them ended up trotting out to a hilltop a few miles away from Ponyville. They were surrounded by high, untamed grasses and wildflowers, with the occasional batch of bushes scattered here and there. There wasn't a pony in sight, though there were plenty of birds flitting around. Erin watched them fly, eager for her own chance. Getting the harness on had been an exercise in awkwardness. There was no way for Rainbow to fit the thing on her without intruding into some very personal space. The harness was a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, with the straps and buckles designed to be adjusted to whatever length needed to fit snugly, but not too tightly, on any Pegasus. Rainbow was the one who did most of the work, all while explaining how Pegasus flight worked. During her instruction, she would occasionally ask Erin to lift or move a leg, followed by her tightening or loosening one of the many straps hung around Erin's body. 3 times, Rainbow had to duck under her belly to take a strap in her teeth to adjust it, which inevitably caused Erin to burst out giggling every time something brushed across her belly. I didn't know you were ticklish there before today, Erin, Rainbow said after the latest bout of giggles. I didn't either, Erin replied airily. New body, you know. Rainbow shuddered. Ugh, don't remind me. It's pretty freaky, but, hey, at least you have wings, now. She reached out and gave Erin a little shove with her hoof. That's the most important thing, right, right. Rainbow grinned, and then studied her hoofwork closely. Looks good. How does it feel? Stretch those legs out and tell me if anything pinches. Erin did so, and even walked in a lazy circle just to be sure. Feels good. Great. We're just about ready. So, you think you can manage to do what I asked you? Erin scowled at that. I don't know, Rainbow. That explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What's so hard? All Pegasi learn this stuff. She shrugged. It's just basic atmospheric alteration, though Noppany calls it that outside of flight school. Rainbow, you said that Pegasus magic can make the air seem thicker on the wings, but without altering either the wings or the air. That's not possible. Dash rolled her eyes. I do it every day, Erin. It's not like even my wings are big and strong enough to support my weight on their own. And it's not just the wings, though that's a big part. She looked up into the sky and gestured with a hoof. A Pegasus can also make the air in front of them act like it's thinner, cutting down wind resistance, and the air beneath them seem denser, helping with buoyancy. She smirked. And, if you're really talented, like me, you can make the air seem denser behind you, pushing you ahead. You know, like if you're doing a sonic rainboom. Yeah, but, Erin shook her head. It doesn't make sense. You say you can change the way things interact without actually changing anything. How? Physics doesn't work that way. Rainbow casually flexed her wings and grinned. Magic, I guess. She snickered at Erin's frustrated expression. Look, it's just like the cloud, right? You didn't actually change it, and you didn't change yourself, but you were able to climb up on top of it. It's the same thing. Erin shot her a cynical look. Really? Yeah. Well, sort of. That was tensing, making clouds seem thicker. What you're going to be doing now is thinning. Look, don't worry too much about it. For now, all I want you to do is imagine that the air in front of you isn't holding you back when we fly, okay? But you don't need to understand it, just do it. Rainbow snorted and stomped a hoof. Get to thinning, girl. Erin opened her mouth to protest before stopping herself. Rainbow was going to take her flying, and she was going to complain about it. All right, Erin said, feeling a grin stretch across her face. Let's do this. That's more like it. Now, just give me a minute to hook up the harness, okay? Rainbow quickly shrugged herself into her own harness, managing to get into it in roughly half the time that it took for Erin to get into hers. Then she attached some straps between the various rings set into each of their harnesses. Flapping her wings, Rainbow hovered over Erin, slowly descending until each of her hooves were almost touching her back while shortening the straps with sharp tugs of her teeth. You ready? Rainbow asked. Erin, who had spent the last few minutes in steadily rising anticipation, was practically dancing in place on the hilltop. Yes. Rainbow was managing to hover above Erin, keeping pace with lazy, slow wing beats that drove what felt like perfectly normal air downwards. Whatever it was that the Pegasus was doing to the air, it didn't feel any different to Erin. Okay, when I tell you to, start running forward, and jump when I tell you. Don't worry about me keeping up, just go. Got it, I got it. Okay, Rainbow said. Get ready, set, start running. Erin took off, running full tilt towards the side of the hill, which cut off sharply. Panic started welling up as the edge got closer, and every instinct she had was telling her to slow down, to stop. She ignored them and, when Rainbow shouted, jump, Erin leapt, laughing with the sheer joy of it as the ground dropped away underneath her hooves. Rainbow grunted above her as the straps between them tightened. The ground below sped by faster and faster, and Erin let out a wild whoop of complete joy. You okay down there? Rainbow's voice rasped down at her. Erin could only answer with excited giggles as her legs instinctively kept running on air. She was too distracted to even notice that her wings had spread open a few inches when the air hit them. How about you start thinning the air, like I told you? Rainbow called down. I'm not doing this just for the exercise. Okay. Erin did her best, imagining the air in front of her as not being a barrier, trying to cut down wind resistance. She folded her legs up underneath her and stretched her head out, trying to make herself feel more aerodynamic. Almost immediately, the air around her seemed to change. The wind still moved just as fast, but the impact of it didn't feel as strong, as if something were blocking most of it from actually touching her. Erin shook her head and grinned widely. Understanding could wait. For now, this was just too cool. You're doing great. Dash called down from above and slightly in front of her. Keep it just like that. We're going to have a little fun. What foo, Rainbow. Dash pulled up sharply, wings beating as she shot into the air like a rocket. With the Pegasus going up nearly vertically, this had the unfortunate side effect of the back of Erin's head pressing into Rainbow's belly, just under the ribcage. Erin's concentration shattered, and suddenly the air was pressing against her full force once again. The ground was dropping farther and farther away as the wind roared in her ears, and suddenly flying seemed like a lot less fun and a lot more terrifying. Rainbow finally leveled out, and Erin dropped away from her, dangling helplessly in the tethers of the harness. Erin had no way of knowing how fast they were moving. Her eyes were shut tight against the sting of the wind, which streamed over her coat and pulled at her mane and tail. Her ears were folded down to protect them against the constant roar of it. Eventually, Erin was able to lever her eyes open, blinking away the tears that instantly sprung up. Her breath caught in her throat. The sky was empty for as far as she could see, with the exception of some distant clouds. The wind was a constant torrent, much stronger up here than it had been closer to the ground. Erin's mane and tail were streaming and fluttering behind her wildly, with the occasional wisp of mane getting in her eyeline before whipping back again. The wind also tugged on her wings, which she vaguely noticed were slightly open, pushing on her feathers and making them bind closer together, sealing the air away from the skin underneath. Take a look at this. Rainbow's shout was barely heard over the rushing air. All of this around you. This is what it means to be a Pegasus. The sky is yours. If Rainbow was waiting for a response, she would be disappointed. Erin was far too busy drinking in the sight of the ground slowly moving far beneath them. She'd seen this sight before, or one very much like it. But seeing the video recovered from the first exploratory drones was completely different from seeing the same thing with her own eyes. Fields and hills as far as the eye could see stretched out in every direction, the grasslands around Ponyville mottled with color and broken by wide stretches of plowed land, the farms budding with green from the new growth of spring. Then there were the deeper textures of the everfree forest, stretching away like a rippling ocean of leaves as far as she could see. The only roads from Ponyville were made of dirt, stretching away from the town in vaguely wandering lines so unlike the straight, blacktop roads Erin was used to seeing on Earth. The roads branched away constantly, becoming narrower as they led to the farms that surrounded the little town. The railway, currently without a train, glimmered like a silver needle across the land, straighter than the roads, pointing towards Canterlot on one side of Ponyville and towards Manhattan on the other. The air even smelled different up here, cleaner and less humid, with a chill crispness that invigorated her and stung the back of her sinuses if she breathed too quickly. I could get used to this, Erin thought. You okay down there? Rainbow asked, lowering her head to look down between her own forelegs. Dash's concerned, upside-down face would have caused Erin to start giggling in any other situation. Instead, she nodded slowly with a huge grin spreading across her face. Well, get back to thinning out that wind, Rainbow shouted. This isn't as easy as I'm making it look. That finally broke Erin's trance. She giggled and began focusing on making the air seem thinner before her once again. Even if she wasn't flying under her own power, this was one of the most profound experiences she'd ever had so far. It was nearly perfect, and she desperately didn't want it to end. Caretaker *. Deep underground, long dormant systems activated. Air began to circulate in the maze of tunnels and chambers that had been left unused for ages. Lights began to glow from the walls and floor themselves, chasing away the darkness that had abided in these corridors for a longer time than a living mind could easily grasp. When the area was once again capable of supporting life, the systems began the process of waking the caretaker. In a small chamber, red lights in the walls pulsed, then grew in intensity, illuminating a space of smoothly carved rock and gleaming metal. The chamber was very nearly empty except for the large crystal in the center. The pulsing lights revealed a figure inside the crystal, stuck like a fly in amber. The red lights faded into white and the pulsing slowed and eventually stopped, bathing the entire room with a scintillating brilliance. Inside the crystal, the figure stirred. It was long and slender, 6 frail-looking limbs moving and stretching in the new light. The front of the crystal holding the shape dissolved into nothingness, allowing the caretaker to step out and stand on 2 thinly toed feet. Deep blue irisless eyes blinked in the harsh light, and he inhaled the stale air through thin nostrils set into a slightly protruding muzzle. The caretaker's skin was roughly pebbled, forest green in color over most of it, though with bright rainbow frills along the head and neck. Most of the rest of the thin and frail body was obscured by a thick and intricately folded robe of creamy white, embroidered with whorls of blue and red up the front. A narrow tail, nearly as long as his body, undulated in the air behind him, with its own set of rainbow frills down the center that ended in a plume of thick, feather-like white hairs. The tail acted as a counterbalance, keeping him from pitching forward when he walked, though it wasn't needed when he was standing upright. Sluggish thoughts stirred in the caretaker's mind. Automated systems had woken him from a slumber too deep for dreaming, which could only mean that something had gone horribly wrong, something which the self-correcting systems couldn't deal with on their own. Something that he, himself, would have to deal with. A thinly fingered hand, one of 4, reached out and waved over the floor of the chamber, and concentric rings of light shot up from the floor. Images resolved in the air before him, and his eyes narrowed at what they showed. A gateway from another world had opened many days ago, allowing mechanical devices to ramble their way in, tearing up the grass and disturbing the lesser animals. The caretaker's throat let out a series of irritated clicks. The most recent hibernation had been a long one, and the system hadn't woken him as quickly as it might have. This had allowed plenty of time for the intruders to open still more gates in other locations, sending more of their metal devices through. Disruptions and distractions. It will have to be corrected, the caretaker decided. The caretaker's upper left arm reached back into the recently vacated crystal cocoon and retrieved his staff. Nearly as tall as he was, the staff was made of carved ebony wood twined with ivory, and set with dimly glowing runes along the length of it. Leaning on his staff and muttering to himself in a language that hadn't been heard in ages, the caretaker made his way slowly out of the chamber and into a vast hallway outside. He was on his way to see a goddess. Author's notes. Brilliant Point had this editor's note. BP's editor's note. Dun dun doon. Chapter 12. Confrontations. It was well past noon when flight practice ended. Rainbow, Dash and Erin, out of their harnesses and back in town, decided to make a quick stop at a local cafe for lunch. And, all that time, Rainbow had kept up an almost non-stop stream of advice and information about flying. For example, Dash said after their food arrived, you can increase the air resistance on the downstroke and decrease it on the upstroke. It really helps to avoid tiring you out. Erin, who hadn't been able to stop smiling since before they had landed, simply nodded. That's another reason to work up strength in your wings, of course, Rainbow continued. The stronger you can flap, the higher you can make the resistance on the downstroke. You get a lot of speed that way. Rainbow kept on talking, giving tidbits of advice and relating stories. She even started using parts of her lunch as visual aids, sketching out a few basic maneuvers with carrot and celery sticks indicating altitude and a cherry tomato acting as the Pegasus. I should get you a sports camera, Erin said vaguely as she picked at her salad. You could wear it and record yourself as you flew. It took a few seconds for it to register that Rainbow had stopped talking. Erin looked up to see Rainbow staring at her, the cherry tomato still under her hoof. A sports camera. Oh, yeah. It's like a little movie camera. Lots of people use them for stuff like doing tricks or skydiving and stuff like that. And it could record my stunts. Well, yeah. Rainbow put her forehooves on the table and leaned forward, crushing her impromptu diorama underhoof as she did so. Erin, I need one of those. How much do they cost? I've got money. She blinked and frowned. I've got some money. How much? Wait, didn't you say that tablet you got for me has a camera? Erin couldn't help laughing at her friend's sudden intensity. Yeah, but I wouldn't use that. Not unless you've got some way of keeping it really secure, and to keep water out of it. Sports cameras can take more of a beating. I'll get one for you, I promise. Honestly, I feel a little bad I didn't think of getting one before I came here. Awesome, Rainbow said with a grin as she sat back down. Then she looked down at the table. Oh, heck, I mushed my tomato. Erin started giggling at that, and Rainbow's coarse laugh joined in a moment later. The conversation went back to flight basics for the rest of her meal. Erin didn't mind, and tried her best to pay close attention to everything Rainbow told her. After the bill came, they went their separate ways, with Rainbow needing to take care of some of the local weather. After trotting away from the cafe, Erin stopped by Whirligig's Flight Emporium once again in order to pick up a set of flight goggles, something she had decided to get when Rainbow, in a fit of optimism, had taken her on a loop-de-loop. She'd spent the entire time screaming in mingled joy and terror, her eyes squeezed nearly shut as the wind tore at her corneas. Whirligig, as quirky as ever, seemed overjoyed to see her. Twice in 1 week, he said when she walked in. I'm feeling particularly blessed, today. In the end, Erin settled on 2 pairs of goggles, one with clear lenses and one tinted. When it came time to try them on, she took one look at herself in the mirror before bursting out laughing. Something wrong? Whirligig asked. No. I just know now why Rainbow Dash keeps her mane so short. Erin ran a hoof across her wilder than ever mane, the mass of hair all tangled and swept back from her face. It's got to make it easier to manage. Or, don't worry, Missy, Whirligig said with a chuckle. You look great with that windblown look. To a Pegasus, at least. Erin's first reaction was to resort to her standard smile, blush and look away, technique of dealing with unexpected compliments. This was followed by the mild discomfort of knowing that, not only did a pony find her attractive, but that his attraction was to a face that wasn't even really hers, wasn't even human. It had happened before, and she still wasn't really sure how she felt about that. Well, she said, deciding to ignore the compliment, let's see how these things fit. Tilde asterisk tilde. Erin became aware of the not quite shouting discussion as she approached her home. 2 ponies, both voices distressingly familiar, were having an argument. And, unless Erin was badly mistaken, she had a good idea of what, or rather who they were arguing about. She broke into a quick trot, arriving quickly on the scene. As she feared, Meadowlark and Ditzy were having an argument in Ditzy's front yard. Fortunately, both Dinky and Marigold seemed to be absent, most likely at school. Which was probably the reason why Meadowlark had decided to stop by now, rather than later. Doesn't matter, Meadowlark was saying, her voice harsh. Stop trying to defend her. She knew my wishes, and even if it was your idea, she should have. Ditzy cut her off, a vexed expression over her features. And I keep telling you, she wanted to leave. She wouldn't have stayed, but I talked her into it. Ditzy's right eye was pointing in a different direction than her left. Erin, remembering what her neighbor had said about stress contributing to that particular problem, picked up the pace, trying to get there before either one said something they'd regret after they calmed down. I have half a mind to forbid Marigold from playing with Dinky ever again. Something like that, Erin thought wryly. Out loud, she said, I hope you're not serious. Both ponies froze, then looked around at her. Ditzy looked slightly panicked for some reason. In contrast, Meadowlark narrowed her eyes and folded her ears flat against her head. Turning her back on Ditzy, Meadowlark trotted forward. About time you showed up. We need to talk. Those 4 words were never a good sign, Erin reflected. She braced herself, schooling her expression to neutrality. Okay, Erin replied carefully. Would you like to come into my house? We can talk more privately there. Meadowlark looked wary for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Do you mind if I stop by later, Ditzy? Erin asked. Her neighbor blinked a couple of times, her eyes going back to normal as she looked back and forth between Erin and Meadowlark. Sure, thanks. Erin led Meadowlark into her house, noting that the other mare, as angry as she probably was with her, still took the time to clean her hooves off on the welcome mat before coming inside. Can I get you something to drink? Erin asked. I'm afraid all I have right now is water. Forget it, Meadowlark said stiffly. I'm not staying long. Erin checked the sigh that tried to erupt from her chest. Obviously, Meadowlark was in lecture mode and intended to have her say. I can't say how disappointed I am, son, Erin, Meadowlark said. I had made my wishes perfectly clear, and the first chance you get, you violate them. That's true, Erin said. Well, almost. I've had chances every day this week to stop by the guest house. I decided to give you a chance to come to me, instead. And, if I hadn't, Meadowlark huffed. Erin flinched at the thought. Then I guess that would have been that. So, why, then? Help me understand, Erin. Meadowlark gestured out the door towards Ditzy's house. Why would you so blatantly violate my wishes? I didn't want to, Erin said. What Ditzy said was true, I wanted to leave. Don't blame this on her, Meadowlark shouted, lowering her head and pouring her hoof across the floor as if she were about to charge. I'm not. Erin said, raising a forehoof defensively. She repeated herself more calmly. I'm not. It's true that she suggested I stay, but the real reason is because I decided to. Well, then, Meadowlark started, but Erin wasn't done yet. The main reason I stayed. It was because I couldn't think of a way to say to Marigold that I had to leave. She would have wanted to know why. What was I supposed to say? Nothing. Anything. I don't know, whatever. Meadowlark's mouth twisted as if she'd eaten something sour. That's not my problem. My problem is you. Erin felt her heart rate climbing. So, what? I should have just walked away without a word. Made Marigold think I was mad at her, or that I didn't like her, or that she'd said something wrong. Is that what you wanted? She had said that more forcefully than she'd intended. One corner of her mind was frantically trying to get her attention, to make her aware that she was getting upset. The rest of her was too focused on the situation to notice. Of course not. Meadowlark snorted. You shouldn't have been over there in the first place. Ditsy is my neighbor and she invited me over. I didn't know Dinky was Marigold's friend, or that she was coming over last night. Fine. You still should have left. Found a way not to make Marigold upset and left. Erin pursed her lips as she considered her response to that. We're going around in circles, now, she said after a few seconds. We're right back where we started. I already told you, if I could have thought of a way to leave without hurting her, I would have. Meadowlark's face was tight, her eyes narrow and her ears pinned back, the muscles of her jaw bulging as she glared at Erin. Look, Erin said after half a minute had gone by. I am more than happy to stay away from the guest house, if you still want me to. And I'll try to avoid Marigold if I can. But do you really want me to act like I don't care about her anymore? Meadowlark flinched and looked away. No, but, this isn't going to work. What do you mean? You living here, next to Ditsy. You have to move. Erin barked an incredulous laugh before she realized that Meadowlark was serious. Wait, you actually want me to move? If you want Marigold and Dinky to still be friends, yes. No, Erin said, shaking her head. No, I just got settled in. I have a bed showing up later today, if they haven't delivered it already. I can't. I'm not going to move. That would be the best solution. Erin shook her head as an ember of resentment started glowing in her chest. It's not a solution, it's just more avoidance. Do you really want me to have to tell Marigold that she can't be friends with Dinky anymore? Because that's what this is coming down to. Erin's mouth hung open as she absorbed that. Confusion turned to incredulity, which in turn fanned that ember of sullen resentment into anger. Don't you dare lay that on me, she snapped. Now, you look here, Meadowlark started, her ears going back again. No. Erin stomped a hoof. You don't get to put this all on me. If you had listened to me, Meadowlark began, but Erin was in no mood to listen. I did listen to you. I stayed away from you, just like you asked, for months. Months. You said you needed time, and I gave it to you, but I'm not going to wait forever. Erin stomped on the floor once again with a forehoof, and Meadowlark flinched back defensively. If you want our friendship to be over, that's fine. Just tell me so I stop hanging on and hoping you'll forgive me one day. But I won't let you blame me for your decisions. Meadowlark, who had drawn back and raised a foreleg defensively across her chest when Erin had started yelling, slowly put her hoof back down. And then, without a word, she turned and walked back out of Erin's house. Erin watched her go, guilt and anger mingling with regret, her stomach churning with nausea. She felt a strong urge to call out, to apologize for what she'd said, but it was almost as if she could hear Applejack's voice in her ear, asking if what she'd said was honestly how she felt. It was. She let Meadowlark leave without another word. Twilight *. The Earth Diplomatic Corps was contained in a large and nicely appointed office building in downtown Canterlot. As Twilight trotted up, she took in the marble facade and the fluted columns, which indicated that the building had likely been built roughly 180 years ago, when that sort of look had been in style. A quick glance at the bronze plaque on the side of the building confirmed her suspicion. She walked into the building with a satisfied smile. After entering through the main door, her hooves sank into the plush red carpeting almost up to the fetlocks, making for very comfortable yet simultaneously uncertain footing. A little like walking on pillows, Twilight decided. She looked around for some indication of where to go, and spotted an information notice on the dark oak wall. According to the sign, she could find the Equestrian Cultural Exchange Committee in room 227, up on the second floor. Twilight climbed the staircase and ended up finding the room she was looking for at the end of the hallway. From what Celestia had told her, the director of this particular project, Backstitch, had gone to lunch a few days ago and had never come back, leaving the project somewhat in disarray on the equestrian end. Twilight, with her love of organizing, was only too happy to look things over. Spike, the great little guy that he was, had offered to help, but Twilight had left him to be pampered by her mother until she knew a little more about what she was getting into. Twilight took a steadying breath and knocked a hoof against the door. After a minute of not answering, she cautiously opened the door and peeked inside with a tentative hello. There were 4 desks inside the room, each in its own corner. Large metal filing cabinets took up whatever wall space wasn't being used by the desks, or by the window on the south wall. A quick glance assured her that Noppany was around. There was supposed to be some pony here, Twilight muttered darkly as she let herself in. She took a closer look at the desks and had to repress a flinch. The office was a mess, with piles of paperwork and empty paper coffee cups everywhere. With nothing better to do until the missing ponies returned from wherever they were, Twilight began idly clearing things up. She had only meant to get rid of the empty coffee cups and other obvious refuse, but curiosity had gotten the better of her, and she soon found herself reading through the stacks of paper on the desks, and even straightening things up as she went. She knew better than to remove any paperwork from the desks themselves, though she might lose some pony hours of work if she did so. Still, stacking everything a little more neatly wouldn't hurt any pony, would it? It was while she was simultaneously reading through an exchange student's folder and rearranging the pencils on one desk that she heard approaching hoofsteps and voices in conversation. The door was flung open and 3 ponies came marching in, 2 mares and a stallion. And tell her that we don't need any. Who the blazes are you? The stallion demanded. Twilight quailed a little at the hostile look and tone, but quickly put on her best winning smile. Hello, I'm Twilight Sparkle. I was asked to stop by and make sure everything was going well after Backstitch left her job. Oh. Yeah, I heard about that, the stallion said, frowning. I said I didn't need anybody's help. We got this under control. I'm certain you do. Still, having an extra pair of eyes wouldn't hurt, would it? Twilight held up the folder she'd been reading. For example, I see that you're telling the students that it will be alright to bring their electronic devices. Yes. Our human counterparts told us that the young people are practically inseparable from those things. Twilight's smile got a little bit brittle around the edges. From what I understand, that's true for most humans. And please, this will go a lot faster if you stop interrupting me. The stallion grumbled something that Twilight decided that she was glad she couldn't make out. The problem is, I haven't seen anything regarding power converters. Have the humans said they would provide them? Now that seemed to finally throw the stallion off. His eyes narrowed as he frowned. Power converters, yes. Human electronics won't plug into equestrian outlets. Also, the voltages are typically incompatible. Oftentimes the wattage is insufficient, requiring some sort of battery arrangement. Twilight tilted her head to one side and smiled sweetly. These humans won't have any way to use their fancy technological devices without some way of recharging them, after all. Oh. The stallion let out an annoyed sigh and flicked his tail. I didn't know that. Well, most ponies wouldn't, Twilight said kindly. I just happen to know more about humans and their culture than most ponies. After all, I'm good friends with one of them. Well, shouldn't the humans provide them, then? The stallion huffed. Yes, but we need to pay for them, Twilight said, holding on to her patience with all four hooves. Just like the humans requisitioned and paid for all the magical talks that our students will need, even though they had to be built in Equestria. She waved a stack of forms with her magic. That's these forms, here, which were supposed to have been filled out last week. Ah, the stallion said, chewing his lower lip. Then he sighed again, seeming to deflate. Damn. Twilight glanced at the two mares, who had been staying silent for the duration of the exchange, and then looked back at the stubborn stallion. Maybe we should start with introductions. Once again, I'm Twilight Sparkle, and I'm very happy to meet you, Mr. Rivets. I'm Rivets, the stallion said somewhat grudgingly. The unicorn mare dipped her head. I'm Ember, she said. And I'm Snowdrift, the Pegasus mare said with a wide grin. Thanks, I think we can use the help. Twilight's smile turned more genuine. It was progress, at least. All right, then, she said, pulling out a quill and placing the stack of paper on a nearby desk. Let's start filling out forms. Erin *. So, how did it go? Ditsy asked, sitting across from Erin at the dining room table. Little Dinky had come home by this point, and was coloring quietly in the living room. Could have gone better, Erin said with a sigh. She was grateful that she had at least managed to stop crying by now, though it had taken her some time standing in her living room before she'd settled down. She related the entire story, keeping her voice down so that Dinky wouldn't overhear. The entire time, Ditsy listened with a thoughtful expression, staying silent except for the occasional encouraging noise in order to keep Erin talking. When Erin finally finished her recap, Ditsy frowned and sighed. That mare is too stubborn for her own good, sometimes, Ditsy said. I mean, she's incredibly smart, but she latches onto things and refuses to let go. I hadn't noticed, Erin said dryly, which caused Ditsy to laugh. Yeah, well. Hopefully, in a few days she'll see reason. I'm glad you stood up for yourself, though. Erin blinked. What do you mean? Well, Meadowlark has a tendency to just push forward relentlessly. She usually won't change course unless something makes her. Ditsy grinned and reached across the table to pat Erin on the shoulder. So, congratulations on pushing back. Yeah, well, Erin's mouth quirked up in an uncomfortable half smile. If I'd known that, I would have yelled at her weeks ago. Ditsy gave a sympathetic chuckle at that. Well, it could still explode in your face either way. I swear, that mare's mind is a treacherous path to walk, sometimes. Especially where Marigold is concerned. She cast a warm look over her shoulder, to where Dinky was coloring, and smiled. Not that I can't understand why. Yeah, I can too, Erin replied with a sad smile. Well, enough about that, Ditsy said. Let's talk about more pleasant stuff. How's the new house coming along? Erin offered up a lopsided smile. Pretty good. It turns out that my new bed was delivered earlier today, so I don't have to sleep on the couch anymore. Oh, Ditsy blinked a few times. That can't be good for your back. Or your wings, for that matter. Erin shrugged. It's a pretty comfy couch. Still, I'm glad to have an actual bed. You know, I never had to use one before I had Dinky, Ditsy said, a wistful tone in her voice. I just scraped together a cloud and sleep on that. Erin straightened up. Oh, why did I never think of that? I can sleep on clouds, now. She grinned, feeling happy again for the first time since Meadowlark had left her house. I totally have to try that. A thought occurred to her, then. Do the hotels in Cloudsdale have cloud beds? Huh. I think so. Ditsy shrugged. I don't know, I never stayed in a hotel there. Whenever we visit Cloudsdale, we usually stay with my aunt or my cousin. Lucky. Erin sighed wistfully. I really want to visit Cloudsdale. Ditsy's ears perked up. Oh, why is that? I saw it for the first time on my way to Canterlot, Erin said. It just seemed, well, it might sound silly, but it seemed so magical. Even more so than Canterlot. She chuckled wryly. Of course, I couldn't have visited it then. No cloud walking for me. They have unicorns to cast cloud walking spells on visitors, Ditsy said with a dismissive hoof wave. How do you think Dinky visits? Oh, yeah. Erin considered that for a moment. Come to think of it, I seem to remember Twilight talking about a cloud walking spell. So, how about this weekend? Ditsy asked, leaning forward with an eager smile on her face. This weekend, Erin repeated, confused. What? Visiting Cloudsdale. Ditsy winked an amber eye at her. I'm sure my aunt would love to meet you. We could go together, and I could show you around. Erin gaped at her for a moment before letting out a joyous laugh. Oh, wow, that would be great. But, I don't know, Erin trailed off, frowning. I was going to head to Canterlot this weekend. Twilight said she might need my help on some sort of cultural exchange thing, and I wanted to order some stuff from Earth while the gateway is open. Well, Dinky has always wanted to see Canterlot. How about we go up there together on Saturday, then we can all take an airship to Cloudsdale if Twilight doesn't need you. It's a win-win, as far as I'm concerned. Erin couldn't have stopped the smile that spread across her face if she'd wanted to. That would work for me. She bounced in her seat and raised her forehooves over her head. Yay, Cloudsdale. Yay, Cloudsdale. Dinky echoed from the other room. Ditzy and Erin stared at each other for a second before they both burst out laughing. Caretaker *. The caretaker stood at the entrance to the chamber of the goddess and struck his staff once upon the floor. The room was a giant sphere, 30 paces across and almost perfectly round. The interior was made of milky white stone with veins of glowing red that provided the only light with which to see. Otherwise, the room was featureless, with the exception of the narrow staircase that led from the hallway outside to the bottom of the chamber, ending in a flat circle 3 paces wide. The caretaker descended the stairs, his staff tapping each step as he went down. When he reached the center platform, he set the staff into a hole that had been bored into the rock. Then he folded his forearms and waited. The wall in front of him began to glow red, brighter and brighter, then faded. A line of pure blackness, wider in the middle and tapering to a point at the top and bottom, appeared down the center. The chamber, when active, had always unnerved the caretaker. It was like standing inside of a gigantic eye, which, in effect, is exactly what it was. A sense of energy filled the air, and he knew he was the center of the goddess' attention. He bowed low and spoke in a language that no living ear had heard for time uncounted. My goddess. The voice that replied was low and smooth, reverberating from the walls, sounding mildly amused. Am I, still, and are you still my worthy ardent? The voice of the goddess took on a darker tone. Or are you still as I named you, so very long ago? Betrayer, destroyer, false prophet. There was a short pause. Murderer, quote. The caretaker straightened, ignoring the taunt. The goddess would try to divert and distract him, he knew. Instead, he got straight to the point. There are intruders on our world, goddess. Have you let them in? Quote. He waited patiently through the long silence that followed. He finally got the answer when the goddess began hissing with laughter. I see, he said, shaking his head sadly. To what purpose? The laughter continued, taking on a more frantic and insane pitch. It cut off suddenly, and the goddess once again spoke, the sharpness of her voice indicating the fury that lay beneath her words. Free the dreamers, my ardent. The dreamers, and myself. Free us, or this world shall burn. Your precious order, this stagnant world, it will crumble into chaos and madness, and you with it. This, I foretell. Your only hope is to break the system yourself. No action you undertake can save you now, but if you free us, perhaps the world itself can still be saved. A shiver ran down the caretaker's spine. Talking with the goddess was like walking a treacherous path in full darkness. He steadied his breathing and reminded himself that it wasn't impossible for the goddess to lie. Even if she were telling the truth, no foretelling was perfect or immutable. Not even when the one who foretold was the goddess herself. No. Order shall be maintained. As the goddess began to wail her protest, he snatched his staff from the hole in which it rested. The great eye of the goddess began to fade, her cries dwindling away to nothing as the caretaker stood and watched, cradling his staff in his arms. Eventually, the stone dimmed and returned to normal. The caretaker turned to walk back up the stairs. He hesitated, then spoke quietly, though he knew she could no longer hear him. And, I am sorry, but you shall never be free. The vast, empty hallways once again echoed with the sound of his staff as he made his way back to the room in which he'd first awoken. He waved one of his forearms, calling up a holographic representation of his world. It was small enough that he could reach around it with 2 arms, if only barely. Continents and seas in miniature were displayed before him as the model world turned slowly. Weather patterns were clear to the eye. If he wished it, portions of the holographic display could be enlarged to show whatever level of detail he wanted, down to the individual leaves on trees. With a word, he could switch from the air currents to the magnetic field. It could even display the fields of magic that surrounded the world, the greater field, which was strong, wild and restrained, and the lesser field which was much tame and weak. The resonance of the intersecting veil had been recorded, and it was a simple matter at that point for him to begin acquiring information. Interestingly enough, it appeared that the invader's world had no magical field of its own. All the more wonder that the goddess would bother with them, if that were the case. If the invaders were unable to use magic, then they posed very little threat overall. In addition, the portals opened so far were small, and they all opened within a relatively contained area. This made the incursions easy enough to defend against. This wasn't an invasion, it was a nuisance. Once again he puzzled over what the goddess was planning. Caution was required. For all that he knew, responding aggressively would play directly into the goddess' plans. He needed to gather information before any response could be made. With that thought in mind, the caretaker uttered a word. The holographic display changed, the world itself becoming indistinct and transparent. Brilliant dots of lights appeared across the display, swarming in the millions over the land, through the seas and across the skies. They were the dreamers. And it was these dreamers that the caretaker had devoted himself to protecting. Thus it was with a sense of grim necessity that he reached a thin-fingered hand into the display and hooked a claw into one of those bright specks at random, drawing it from the teeming multitude. The dreamer squirmed and twisted, trying to escape, but the caretaker's clawed hands allowed it no release. I am so very sorry, my friend, he said sadly. He brought the struggling dreamer with him to another display, first examining the mind he held. Astoundingly enough, there were still some faint memories, a vague sense of self, still lingering. Even after all this time, this dreamer still had some individuality. Amazing. The fragmented memories had to go, of course. They were stripped away and discarded. The sense of individuality, however, was reinforced. And, with it, new information was added, a new purpose. The dreamer, or what was left of it, stopped trying to escape as it finally accepted its new purpose. Remaking the dreamer had taken a considerable amount of time, and it needed a new name, as it was no longer a dreamer. Infiltrator, the caretaker said, giving it a name. The first of your kind. And, I can hope, the last. Quote. The caretaker was under no illusions. This thing that he had created was a monstrosity. A work of art, maybe, but a horrific one. Still, it was a necessity. The goddess was many things, but she was no fool. There was more to this situation than was immediately apparent, and the information this one gathered could prevent untold tragedy from befalling his world. They didn't need to wait long. The intruders opened a gateway the next day, once again violating the world he was sworn to protect. He imagined the goddess laughing as he brought up a holographic display that showed the location. A room of metal and concrete existed on the other side of that hole in reality. Chapter 13, A Very Busy Weekend, Part 1. Twilight *. Twilight yawned hugely as she made her way through the streets of Canterlot, which were painted a cheerful gold by the freshly risen sun. Breakfast that Friday morning was at the Silver Crescent, at Rarity's suggestion. According to her, the place had just opened up recently and had quickly become locally popular. Rarity had been right. Twilight saw the line before the cafe itself even came into view. The line of ponies went out the door and down the street before disappearing around the corner at the end of the block. Twilight let out a short groan at the sight, and started wondering if she'd be able to convince Rarity to eat elsewhere. As she got closer, though, she noticed that there were two sets of doors. The set on the left was for to-go only, which was responsible for the long line. The second set of doors was for sit-in dining and had no wait at all. Her mood much improved, Twilight picked up the pace at the prompting of her grumbling stomach and let herself into the second set of doors. She immediately spotted Rarity sitting at a small table in the dining area, reading from a menu and sipping tea. Her friend's mane was up in a business-like bun on the back of her head, though, for Rarity, business-like still included several jeweled pins to keep it in place. "Hi, Rarity," Twilight said as she sat down, slinging her saddlebags over the empty chair between them. "Twilight." Rarity beamed and put aside the menu. "How lovely to see you. You look, not exactly well rested, actually." She offered a sympathetic smile. "Yesterday didn't go smoothly, I take it." Twilight uttered a short, bitter laugh. "You could say that. Their paperwork was such a mess, I actually took a break to bring Spike back to help out. They only had half of the visas completed and properly signed off. I had to run over to the ministry office itself to rush everything through. And, even then, I had to drop Princess Celestia's name more than once to get any pony moving." She sighed, massaging her temples with her hooves. "On top of that, I have the strangest feeling I've forgotten something important." Shrugging, she offered up a weak smile. "Oh, well, at least the most crucial stuff should more or less be ready by now. I'm heading back there after breakfast to make absolutely sure." Rarity smiled. Another crisis averted by Twilight Sparkle's amazing organizational skills. "This calls for a celebration." Twilight chuckled. "Well, yes, I am good at organizing. I just wish everything hadn't been so," she waved a hoof vaguely, trying to get the right word to pop up in her tired and stress-addled brain. "Last minute." "Yeah, that works." Twilight looked around. The line at the to-go window was moving pretty quickly. Ponies would walk up and order the drinks, shuffle off to one side, and a few moments later one of the baristas would pass over an insulated paper cup full of coffee. "This place sure is busy," she noted. "They have excellent coffee," Rarity said. "It doesn't hurt that they're also very quick. Plus, they have their logo emblazoned on every cup of coffee they sell. It's all about branding, dear. Ponies see those cups everywhere, and so they want the same thing." Twilight frowned at the logo printed on her menu. "You know, I have to think Princess Luna might be upset about that, since it looks an awful lot like her cutie mark." "Well, it's not as if a crescent moon is an uncommon symbol," Rarity replied. "Doesn't your father also have a crescent moon cutie mark?" "Well, yeah, but it looks totally different." Twilight rolled her eyes and grimaced. "Okay, you're right. Maybe I'm just a bit cranky after the day I had yesterday." "It's quite all right, darling." Twilight smothered a yawn behind her hoof. "Sorry. Anyway, how did your day go?" "Quite well, actually. They desperately needed my help with the aesthetics of the planned designs, the poor dears. Here, I have something to show you that I think you might be interested in." Rarity's horn glowed, and a bundle of papers came floating out of her own saddlebags. Twilight took the papers in her own field and looked at them with growing interest. "Is this the diagram for the magical construct that goes into the cachettes?" Rarity grinned. "Why, yes it is." Twilight tilted her head, perking her ears forward curiously. "Cachettes. It's what we've been calling them. Magical batteries, and etheric storage. Sounds so technical, and talk doesn't apply to earrings, necklaces and the like." "Oh, I see," Twilight said as she leaned in to get a closer look at the diagram. "Wow, they've made some refinements since I worked on it last." The initial concept for the magic batteries had been to form an incomplete spell circle, one that lacked any release conditions or triggers. The circle would gather magical energy up to its maximum capacity, but not be able to release it on its own. A pony would have to consciously draw magic from it for it to release any of the stored energy. Looks like they've made the energy gathering even more efficient than when I helped with the initial design. Twilight's eyes traced along the circle. "They've simplified it considerably, as well." "So I understand," Rarity said. "It's fairly easy to replicate, though it is a little tedious." "It would be." Twilight took out a sheet of paper from her own saddlebags and began taking notes. "So, what new materials are they trying to use for infusing this circle?" "Well, they have some success with various precious metals, and some dense hardwoods. Those go fairly quickly, but aren't as stable. Gems have the highest stability, but take considerably longer to inscribe." Rarity smiled. "That's what I wanted to ask about. Altering crystal structures enough to etch this design into it takes a qualified unicorn a good amount of time. I was wondering if you could think of any way to speed up the process." Twilight frowned while she studied the designs. They really were elegant in their simplicity, with hardly any room for improvement. Still, Rarity was counting on her, so she set herself to studying the designs, looking for any way to improve things at all. Her quill flew as she took notes, even going so far as to replicate the design itself on a piece of paper in minute detail in order to make sure she understood the circle in its entirety. While her quill flew, so did her mind, trying to figure out any small tweaks or changes that could result in an even simpler version of the circle. "Twilight." "Yes." Twilight looked up, flushing when she saw both Rarity and their waiter looking at her. "Oh, sorry, I was a bit caught up in this. Did you order already, Rarity?" "Yes, I did." "Did you know what you wanted, dear?" "I'll have whatever you're having, I guess," she said. The waiter made a note on his pad. "Right, I'll have your food out in a jiffy." You do that, Twilight said absently as she returned to studying the design in front of her. She chewed on her bottom lip, making notes and writing out calculations on a piece of scratch paper beside her. Maybe invert the second matrix, she muttered. No, that would throw the third quadrant out of balance. We'd need to adjust the initial phase together. As she kept working on the problem, she slowly became aware of something tugging at her attention. Finally she looked up to see Rarity looking at her with an amused smile. What? Your food is getting cold, Twilight, Rarity said, pointing with the fork held in her magical grip. Twilight looked down to see a plate with a single poached egg, rye toast, and some sectioned grapefruit sitting before her. She poked at the toast with her hoof while frowning. I really should have ordered something else. Rarity smirked. Consider it revenge for tempting me with garlic bread yesterday. Okay, fair enough. Twilight's eye slowly gravitated back to the design schematics. I don't think I'll be able to simplify that any further, though I do have a suggestion. Rarity lowered her teacup and smiled with a twinkle in her eye. Yes, Twilight. We could increase the capacity for storage by making larger circles, Twilight said. Her horn glowed and her quill began sketching. Look, you could make a larger structure that would store a similarly larger amount of magical energy and ship those to the homes of the host families where the equestrian students will be staying. That would decrease their reliance on talks, which, in turn would allow for fewer talks being required. Twilight, Rarity said. And I bet we could even use the larger stations. I should come up with a name for that, really. I bet we could make it so that they could actually recharge the talks. Right now, we're planning on recycling the ones we ship to Earth. You know, having the students send theirs in to be recharged and sending back fully charged ones in replacement. This could cut down on a lot of the logistics required for that. Twilight, dear, Material composition wouldn't be as large of a problem, either. It could be made out of any kind of metal or wood. Or, heck, even stone for a circle this large. Twilight frowned and crossed out some of the notes she'd written down before starting over with some calculations. What would really be perfect, though, is if we found some way to convert other forms of energy into magic. Say, electricity. That's not. I mean, humans have electricity in abundance. They even make it directly out of sunlight. Sunlight. That's pretty amazing, don't you think? If we could make a solar-powered etheric converter, ooh, I like that name. I'll make a note of it, then a pony could stay on Earth indefinitely. Twilight looked up and grinned. The grin started fading when she noticed the glassy-eyed look on Rarity's face. I got carried away, didn't I? Just a bit, darling, Rarity said. I was asking for the jewelers, not for the sake of the exchange students. Though, I must say, having a larger store of magic to charge the cachettes is a grand idea, and solves another problem we've been having. What problem would that be? Twilight asked. Well, apparently the smaller cachettes have storage issues. Well, they would have, Twilight said, nodding. The ability to retain magic increases drastically as the size of the circle increases. Something the size of an earring would last less than a day of minimal to moderate use. And that is the issue they're having, Rarity said with a sigh. However, if we can give them something larger to use to recharge it, well, that opens up many new possibilities, doesn't it? Yes. A flash of inspiration hit Twilight right then and she grinned hugely. And I may have a way to speed up the inscribing process. Oh, that's wonderful. Rarity beamed and leaned forward eagerly. What would we need to do? Twilight's quill was already racing over a new sheet of paper as she answered. Simply put, we can use a mock-up of the design, scaled to the correct size and adjusted for the materials used. A unicorn could use a simple transcribe spell to push it from the first medium to the second. If you use a printing press for the circle and the target material used is standardized enough, then you could push through several inscribed cachettes in the time it takes to do a single one now. Twilight sat back, feeling a warm glow of satisfaction at the overjoyed look on Rarity's face. Oh, Twilight, you have no idea how much time this will save us. Well, I could probably come up with an estimate. How long does it take now? For a gem inscription? Rarity hummed and tapped her hoof on her chin. On a good quality gem, it takes a skilled unicorn roughly a full 8-hour day. Well, then, if this works out as well as I hope it will, then I believe you'd be able to complete an inscribed gem in roughly 1/10 that time. So, you would save approximately 7 hours and 12 minutes per gem, at a guess. Rarity was staring at her with a confused little smile on her muzzle. Twilight decided to clarify. Of course, that's just a rough estimate based what you've just told me and on what I believe would be the optimal results from transcribing onto a gem. I may be missing some variables, since I'm not all that familiar with the current process. Oh, Twilight, Rarity said before she began laughing. After a moment, Twilight joined in, though she wasn't completely certain how what she said was funny. Applejack *. Ponyville's open market was thrumming with activity, even before noon. Early harvests had already started coming in from the local Earth Pony farms, mostly leafy green vegetables, and ponies were lining up to get the fresh produce. Sweet Apple Acres was geared more towards growing grains and legumes while waiting for the apples to come in, though they typically did have a field or two devoted to alfalfa. AJ wandered the open market, checking the prices, even though she didn't need any produce at the moment. Granny's garden had several types of lettuce growing in it, which was plenty for the Apple family's meals. What AJ needed had been a bit more complicated. Winter had passed but it had left its mark on the farm. They needed fresh paint for the barn, new nails, and a variety of other durable goods. She had just arranged a delivery from Filthy Rich's Barnyard Bargains, and was now in the mood for a quick snack before heading back and getting to work. It was while Applejack was trotting towards Sugarcube Corner that she spotted Erin. Her friend was walking around and scanning the sky with a thoughtful frown on her muzzle. Hey, there, Erin, Applejack said as she approached. What's up? Erin blinked and looked over, breaking into a huge smile. Hey, AJ, how are you doing today? Fine, just fine. I was heading to Sugarcube Corner to pick myself up a bite to eat. Care to join me? Sure, sounds fun. Erin fell in beside Applejack. Erin was limping, Applejack noticed as they walked. Not very much, but she was definitely favoring her right foreleg. Everything okay there, Sugar? Only, I noticed you seem to be having trouble with your leg. Applejack pointed her muzzle at the limb in question. Erin's muzzle twisted into a grimace. Just a little sore. My morning runs are a lot harder than they used to be. I keep hoping my Earth Pony magic will kick in, but so far it hasn't happened. Earth Pony magic. Applejack shot Erin a confused smile. Ain't sure I know what you mean. You know, increased strength and endurance. Erin glanced over at her and frowned. I thought that was part of having Earth Pony magic. Well, AJ chuckled. It isn't it ain't. Earth ponies tend to be hardy, and we can get knocked around more than most ponies and still stay standing, but it ain't like we just get it hoofed over to us. We have to work to get stronger, just like any pony else. Erin let out a dissatisfied grunt. Yeah, I think I'm starting to get that. Granted, I've only been going for runs for a few days, but... well, my old body was a lot stronger and faster. It's annoying to be so out of shape. You'll get there. AJ nudged her with a shoulder. And, speaking of getting there, here we are. Applejack held the door open, letting Erin go in first. Mrs. Cake gasped at them, an expression of relief on her face as she came around to the front of the counter. Oh, girls. I'm so glad you're here, the shopkeeper said as she trotted towards them. Are you here to help with Pinky? AJ blinked, confused. Something is wrong with Pinky, Erin asked, sounding concerned. Mrs. Cake's ears drooped. Oh, I just thought. Well, she's been up in her room for the last 3 days and has barely left it. Her brows knit as she cast a worried glance towards the top of the staircase. I don't even know if she's been eating. We haven't seen her out of her room for days, now. She scuffed a hoof on the floor. Every time we try to talk to her, she shouts through the door that she's researching. I'm starting to get really worried. AJ looked upwards, in the general direction of Pinky's bedroom. Her snack would have to wait. We'll see what we can do, Mrs. Cake. Oh, thank you, girls. Erin followed Applejack up the stairs until they reached Pinky's door. Applejack was about to knock, but something just felt off. You reckon she's okay? AJ whispered to Erin. The other mare's mouth was set in a firm line. I think I know what the problem is, she said, her voice sounding a little exasperated. AJ frowned and scratched a hoof along the back of her mane. What's that? She's probably been locked up here with her tablet this whole time, Erin sighed. I should have expected something like this. Applejack frowned at the other mare. Them doohickeys ain't actually dangerous, are they? Only, I told Applebloom I'd let her use mine sometime. They're not at all dangerous by themselves, Erin replied. Applejack noticed that her ears were drooping as she said it, though. It's all in how you use them, really. With that, Erin rapped a hoof sharply on the door 3 times. Go, way. Pinky's voice said through the door. I'm busy. Pinky, it's Sunflower. I'm here with Applejack, and we. A huge commotion could be heard through the door, followed by the sound of hoofs scrambling across a wooden floor. Half a second later, the door was flung open with a crash. The lights were off in her bedroom, and Applejack got a quick impression of bloodshot eyes and a snarled mane. There was a shriek of Sunflower, as 2 pink forelegs shot out the doorway, wrapping around Erin's neck and pulling her into the darkness. Applejack proceeded more carefully, looking around as she stepped into Pinky's bedroom. All of the shades were lowered, casting the room in gloomy shadows. Empty bags of snack chips littered the floor, and every surface had a bakery box stacked on it, some empty and others still partially full. It looked like Pinky's diet for the last 3 days had been nothing to brag about. Pinky herself was looking even rougher. Her coat was greasy and sticking up in all directions, which AJ judged meant that she hadn't showered or even brushed herself in the last few days. The food crumbs stuck in Pinky's coat and mane were a pretty big hint that she was right. Definitely gotta keep an eye on Applebloom, if I ever let her use mine, Applejack thought. Pinky had Erin in the middle of the floor, holding Erin's muzzle between her pink hooves while she shot off question after question, barely seeming to take the time to breathe as she did so. Erin was frozen, staring at Pinky like a mouse would stare at a snake. To why they had to go there? Does it really matter who was on first? Why just a thermos? Do your toys really come to life when nobody's looking? Do you guys really have magic board games, and how can I get one? How many humans actually try to raise leopards? Applejack put a hoof on Pinky's shoulder. Pinky, she said, trying to get a word in edgewise. Quote ... Was completely obsessed with honey, only he spelled it wrong. There are ogres in the swamps. Was Gary really king of the humans? And video games. I know I missed so many references and I need you to explain them to me. Pinky. Applejack said, giving her friend a little shake. Someone should tell that cricket that wishing on stars doesn't do anything. I've tried it. Enough, Applejack decided, was enough. She pulled Pinkie Pie away from Erin and turned her around so they were facing each other. Pinkie Pie. Snap out of it. P. Sherman, Pinkie rasped weakly, her eyes darting and haunted. 42 Wallaby Way. Pinkie, stop. Where did they get the coconuts, Applejack? Pinkie's eyes focused on her, intent and frantic. Where? They're tropical. The prop department, Erin said, finally shaking off her shock. It was just a movie, Pinkie Pie. Pinkie's head slowly rotated to look at Erin. Her eyes blinked slowly, and a look of realization started to settle over her features. Oh. That's right, Pinkie said in a whisper. The tension fled and her body slumped. I kinda forgot. I haven't slept in a while, I think. Have you been watching movies on your tablet this whole time? Erin asked, frowning at a glowing lump on Pinkie's bed. Mr. Hugglebunny, Pinkie corrected absently, her head drooping toward the floor. And, kinda, I guess. Pinkie, that was 3 days ago. Oh. Pinkie blinked owlishly and looked around as if seeing her room for the first time. Really? She asked in a meek little voice. Really? Applejack said. At least, that's when I got mine. And, you've been holed up here this whole time, doing nothing but watching movies. And shows. And short subjects. Pinkie shuddered and whispered, there's so many. Applejack snorted and walked over and flicked on the light switch, which caused Pinkie to flinch and suck in a breath of air while clenching her eyes shut. The light didn't do the room's appearance any favors. And, now that the initial shock was over, she became aware of the smell, a combination of sugar, stale air and unwashed pony. First things first, Applejack said, trotting over to a window and opening the shade. We get these windows open and get some fresh air in here. She suited words to action, pushing the window up. A welcome breeze immediately started to freshen the room as she made her way to a second window. In the meanwhile, Pinky, you're going to take a shower, AJ said as she struggled with the second window. It was stubborn, requiring a bit more muscle than the first one. You'll feel better if you're clean, I reckon. Oh, Pinky looked down at herself, blushing. Yeah, I suppose I'm probably pretty stinky, huh? Just a bit, Applejack said with a smile. While you're cleaning yourself up, Erin and I will clean up your room. We will. Erin asked, flinching a little when AJ turned to stare her. I mean, yeah, we will. Oh, you don't have to. Just hold it there, Sugar Cube, Applejack said. You need a clean place to sleep. And, you're gonna sleep, just as soon as you get back out of your shower. She butted Pinky gently with her head, urging her towards the door. Go on, now, git, we got this. Pinky sighed and, defeated, slunk towards the bathroom. Applejack took a moment to look around the room. Right, she said with a decisive nod. Erin, can you go and ask Mr. Cake where the clean bed sheets are? These need changin'. On it. Erin said, heading towards the doorway. And bring up a garbage bag when you come back up. Applejack looked around and sighed. Make the two, right. Erin called back as her hooves clattered down the stairs. AJ worked on getting the rest of the windows open. Between the fresh air and the natural light, things were already a lot better in Pinky's room. The next order of business, Applejack decided, was to strip the bed. She started to make her way over only to stop and stare at what she saw there. Pinky's bed wasn't unoccupied. Propped up in a sitting position was a large stuffed rabbit, roughly the size of a small dog. It was a dark, cloudy grey with a dingy white belly. It had shiny black button eyes, and one of its large ears was flopped over its face. That, along with a mouth that seemed to be stitched into a frown, gave the thing a morose appearance. The rabbit was wearing denim overalls, but that wasn't the strangest thing. The front of the overalls had been cut away and expertly sewn back together into a kind of harness. Something glassy was being held in the harness and, after a moment, Applejack realized it was Pinky's tablet. The power cord trailed out of the pocket of the rabbit's overalls and down towards the outlet. So, Applejack said with a grin as she approached it, you must be Mr. Hugglebunny. She wasn't expecting the screen to light up, and she sure wasn't expecting a sad-sounding voice to emanate from the stuffed rabbit. That's right, Mr. Hugglebunny said. Huh, Applejack said, taking a step back. That's creepy. What's creepy? Erin asked from the doorway. She had a bundle of clean sheets on her back. Applejack pointed wordlessly. Erin trotted up to get a better look, then stopped and stared for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she burst out laughing. Oh, that's perfect. Erin said, that is so Pinkie Pie. Applejack couldn't help a chuckle of her own. Reckon, you're right. Come on, let's get this room cleaned up. Between the two of them, it didn't take too long. Mr. Hugglebunny got moved to the nightstand, the sheets were changed and the blankets vigorously shaken to expel any wayward crumbs. The stale old baked goods and snack bags were piled into the garbage bags. Gummy, Pinky's pet alligator, was standing by his food dish, which had separate bowls for food and water, both of which were full. That meant that Pinky had at least still taken care of her pet, even though she'd stopped taking care of herself. They had just finished cleaning the floor when a freshly showered and much saner-looking Pinkie Pie walked back into the room. Oh, wowie. Pinky said, looking around with wide eyes. You didn't have to do all that. Now I feel bad. I'm the one who should feel bad, Erin said with a sigh. I didn't mean for my present to make you stay up for 3 days straight. Well, that's my fault, Pinky said, then yawned until her jaw cracked. Nice work on Mr. Hugglebunny, Erin said, nodding towards the stuffed rabbit which was currently slumped over itself on the nightstand. Thanks. Now, Pinky, Applejack said, putting on the voice she used to talk to Apple Bloom when the girl was up to her usual shenanigans, I don't want to hear about you doing this again. You understand, you need sleep, and you can't shut yourself away for days just to play with a new toy, no matter how fun it is. Pinky sighed, her head drooping towards the floor. Yes, Mom, Applejack spluttered. I ain't. She stopped, noting that Pinky was looking up at her with a gleam in her eye and a small smile curling up the corner of her mouth. She chuckled. Right, sorry, I'm just worried, about ya, that's all. Thanks AJ, Pinky said, coming up and giving her a hug. She smelled a lot better, like soap and shampoo, AJ noted. Then Pinky hugged Erin, too. Thank you both. If it's okay with you, I think I'll get some sleep, now. She yawned again. I'm pretty tired. You got it, Applejack said as she and Erin moved out to the hallway. As AJ shut off the lights, she noticed that Pinky had already slid between the sheets. Good night, Mr. Hugglebunny, Pinky murmured as Applejack shut the door. Good night, Pinkie Pie, the stuffed rabbit replied. Applejack shuddered. That's just plain weird, she whispered to Erin, who was already making her way downstairs. Erin chuckled. You get used to it, if you set up the personal assistant feature. I ain't so sure I want to, now, Applejack replied as she followed Erin down to the main floor. Mrs. Cake was overjoyed to hear that Pinky had showered and was now sleeping off her 3-day movie binge. In fact, she was so happy that she refused to take their bits when they ordered, no matter how much Applejack argued. AJ finally gave in with a sigh, and settled down to eat her pastry. Applejack's apple tart didn't last very long, and neither did Erin's chocolate-drizzled donut. Soon enough, the two of them were back out on the road. Well, that was sure strange, Applejack said as they walked along. Erin, who looked a little downcast, nodded. Yeah, I really should have checked up on her sooner. Ain't your fault, Applejack asserted. Pinky's a grown mare, she should know how to take care of herself. Erin grunted and walked in silence for a few seconds. Eventually her eyes turned skyward again. Lookin' for somethin', Erin smiled sheepishly. Yeah, Rainbow Dash took me flying yesterday. I was kind of hoping she'd be able to do it again today. Applejack whistled, impressed. You're up and flying already. That's sure impressive. I'm not exactly flying, Erin said with a wince. More like being dragged through the air. My wings still aren't working right. Erin scowled at the offending appendages. Applejack shot her a sympathetic smile. I'm sure it'll all work out, Erin. Yeah, Erin said morosely. I'm probably just too eager. Heck, I haven't even been here a week yet. They walked in silence for a little while. Then Applejack had an idea. Tell Yar what? Why don't Yar come out to the farm for a bit, and we'll see if I can't help Yar figure out how to get in touch with your earth pony magic. Erin perked up at that. Really, why not? Applejack chuckled. Gotta warn Yar, though. It ain't like learning unicorn magic. To get you in touch with earth pony magic, I gotta work Yar, and hard. It's the only way. That's fine. Erin said with an eager smile. Well, come on, then. Applejack said, grinning. She broke into an eager trot, heading for home. Tilde asterisk Erin asterisk tilde tilde. The rhythmic click-clacking of the train provided an underlying rhythm to Erin and Ditsy's conversation on what had turned out to be an absolutely beautiful Saturday morning. The two of them were sitting across from each other on the Canterlot Express, talking quietly while Dinky ignored them both in order to stand up on her hind legs and peer out the window at the scenery that was drifting by. Erin's wings twitched uncomfortably under her simple green sundress. It was one that Rarity had made for her before she'd gone back to Earth and, as such, it was lacking in wing holes. Fortunately, her first pony body had been just a bit broader across the shoulders, which meant that there was enough room for the wings underneath. Still, the fabric was pressing her wings into her sides, causing the feathers to ruffle occasionally. To Erin, the mild discomfort was worth it. She wasn't getting nearly as many stares as an apparent unicorn than she had as an alicorn. Ditsy had seen Erin in her dress that morning and had immediately panicked, asking if it was expected to wear clothes while in Canterlot. Erin had assured her that plenty of ponies went without. Ditsy had compromised with a wide-brimmed white straw hat with a bright yellow daisy tucked into its pink band, which had the advantage of looking nice while also keeping the sun out of her eyes. Dinky had given in to her mother's demands to look presentable, but only to the extent that she'd allowed her mane and tail to be combed and tied back with dark purple ribbons. Currently, Erin was relating her experiences with trying to unlock Earth Pony magic, trying to embellish the story here and there to make it more interesting. Still, there was only so much one could do when working with stories about weeding and hauling bags of seed until every part of your body ached. At least they fed me, Erin said with a chuckle. Applejack insisted. Told me all my work was worth at least a meal. And you said yes, right? Ditsy asked. Of course. Have you ever had Granny Smith's cooking? Can't say that I have. Ditsy cleared her throat and glanced at her filly, who was still totally enraptured by the view outside of the window. I imagine Big Macintosh was there. Yeah, Erin replied. She tilted her head, looking curiously at Ditsy. There had been an odd note in the mare's voice when she asked that. He was there. Why? Ditsy cleared her throat and looked away. Well, he's nice. And he's a good worker. She blushed and leaned closer, adding in a near whisper, and he's not bad to look at, either. Erin gasped, clapping both forehooves up to her mouth. Oh my gosh, are you? Shush. Ditsy said, nodding towards her daughter, who was still glued to the window. Let's just say, sometimes, the view is so nice that I sometimes find myself staying longer than strictly necessary when I deliver their mail. Erin couldn't help giggling, and Ditsy joined in a moment later. This caught Dinky's attention, who turned and scowled at them. What's funny? The filly asked. Nothing, Erin and Ditsy said at the same moment, which got them giggling harder. Dinky grunted in annoyance and went back to staring out the window. Erin resolved to try to find some subtle way of sounding out Macintosh to see if he'd be interested in dating a mare with a young filly. So, do you think it did any good? Ditsy asked after the giggles died down. Do you feel any closer to being able to use Earth Pony magic? Erin grimaced. I don't know about that, but the Earth felt a lot closer to me by the time I was done. Oh, yeah. It was caked onto my hooves, crusted into my coat, and I even had some in my mane and tail. Erin sighed. You should have seen the state of my shower once I got done washing it all out. Ditsy gave a sympathetic wince. I can imagine. I know what it's like when Dinky comes in after rolling around in the mud for a day. Dinky pulled her attention away from the window. I don't roll in the mud. What about last Tuesday? That was a mud fight. Well, that mud fight took me almost 2 hours of cleaning after you tracked half of Ponyville through my house, little filly, Ditsy said with a frown. Yeah, well, Dinky blushed before letting out an annoyed huff. Rumble started it. Ditsy shook her head. Dinky, in an apparent bid to pretend like the last few seconds of conversation never happened, turned resolutely back to the window and pointedly ignored them. So, what were you two planning on doing while I'm looking up Twilight? Erin asked. Did you want to see if I could give you a quick tour of the palace? Dinky whipped her head around to stare at her mother with pleading eyes, which Ditsy ignored. That's okay, Ditsy said, ignoring the whine her daughter let out in response. I feel pretty out of place around all those important ponies. I was thinking of taking Dinky to see the Royal History Museum. We could meet up there, once you're done talking to your people, if you want. Erin wanted to make some assurances that Ditsy would fit right in with the important ponies, but decided not to push it if the mare felt uncomfortable about it. Besides, the museum was actually a place she was interested in, as well. Sounds good, she said. They chatted for a little while longer, mostly just exchanging small talk about life in Ponyville. The train pulled up to the Canterlot station slightly after noon. As they put their saddlebags on, Erin and Ditsy confirmed their plans to meet at the museum's gift shop in 3 hours, said their goodbyes and went on their separate ways. As opposed to her last visit to Canterlot, this time every pony ignored her. Erin grinned as she trotted along, glad that she'd thought of wearing a dress this time. Even if it did make it feel like a bunch of sweat was gathering under her wings. The guards at the castle gateway took a quick look at the ID that Erin produced from her saddlebags before ushering her in. Erin asked a palace servant where to find Twilight's quarters. The first servant didn't know, but she was able to bring Erin to a second servant, who gave her what were probably the most convoluted directions that Erin had ever heard. With an eye on the time, Erin trotted through the hallways, occasionally asking for directions, until she found herself outside of what she was pretty sure was the apartment that Twilight was currently staying in. She knocked and waited. After a few seconds, the door opened, revealing a startled Twilight Sparkle. Oh. Erin, I wasn't expecting you, Twilight said. There was a long pause while Erin worked that over in her head. Ah. You asked me to stop by, remember? Erin studied the blank look on Twilight's face. The exchange students, and how having a native earthling might help. Twilight's mouth dropped open and her eyes widened as the fur on her cheeks darkened with a blush. Oh, that all happened last night, actually. Erin gaped at her. Sorry. Twilight said with a feeble smile. I totally forgot I asked you to come out. The paperwork was a mess, and everything was so last minute, it was insane. I was running my tail off the minute I walked through the door. The only one I could count on was Spike from my parents' place for some extra help, and it was still a close thing. She scuffled her hooves and ducked her head. You're not mad, are you? Erin blinked several times in rapid succession. Then her shoulders started shaking. A moment later, the first chuckles bubbled up, quickly turning into full-blown laughter. Oh, Twilight, she said. Don't ever change. No, I'm not mad. This actually works out well for me. It does. Yeah. My neighbor, Ditzy, wanted to see Canterlot anyway. She has some relatives in Cloudsdale, so if you didn't need me, we were going to head out and stay with them while she showed me around the city. Erin grinned. You know how much I've always wanted to go to Cloudsdale, right? Twilight let out a relieved sigh. Right, she said with a nod. I'm still sorry. I shouldn't have forgotten. It's fine, really. So, what are your plans for today? Erin asked. I'm meeting up with Ditzy and her daughter for a late lunch after taking care of some things in the Harmonics compound. We're meeting at the Royal History Museum. Did you want to join us? Ooh, museum. Twilight said, her eyes growing wide. Oh, but I can't. Princess Luna was going to give me my first lessons in dream magic in about 10 minutes. Well, that sounds even better. Erin smiled and nudged her friend with a hoof. You'll be the first unicorn to learn this magic in centuries, right? The first of many, Twilight replied, nodding and doing a very poor job of hiding the gleeful smile on her face. And not just unicorns. It seems like Pegasi and Earth ponies can learn aspects of this magic, too. Oh, neat. Twilight nodded again. Luna sent out couriers all over Equestria with recruitment posters, and apparently the first volunteers have already started to arrive. Well, that's great. I should get going to Luna's chambers, Twilight said. Did you want to walk with me? Sure, Erin said, stepping aside so Twilight could exit her apartment. The two friends filled each other in on the days since they'd last seen each other. They were only able to cover the very basics before they reached the doors to Luna's own quarters. The two royal guards standing outside of her door gave them both implacable looks before returning their stares to the opposite walls. I guess I'll see you when I get back to Ponyville, Twilight said, giving Erin a hug. Give the girls my love for me, okay? You got it, Erin replied, returning the hug. You take care, and have fun. How can I not? Twilight asked with a smile that lit up her face. I'm going to be learning new magic. Erin laughed. Twilight disengaged the hug and turned to the guards, who knocked and then opened the doors to Luna's chambers without a word. With one last wave, Twilight turned and trotted eagerly through the doorway. Watching her friend go, Erin couldn't help but feel a little sad. It would be at least a few more days before they got to see each other again. Still, maybe this dream magic was something that Twilight could end up teaching her, along with regular magic. Perked up by that thought, Erin gave both of the guards a polite nod, which was, of course, stoically ignored, and then walked away, making her way towards the Royal Gardens and the Harmonics gateway back to Earth. Maggie ***. Dr. Maggie Henson frowned down at her tablet, flipping through page after page of expenses and budget items. She could feel a headache coming on and, not for the first time, she marveled at how different math could feel when it was used in physics versus, say, a cost analysis report. A brief knock at her door broke her concentration. Come on in, she called, immensely grateful for the excuse to put the tablet aside. The door was opened by a familiar auburn-maned pony. Hi, Maggie, Erin said with a smile. Erin. Good to see you. Come on in. Thanks, Erin said. She opened the door wide enough to accommodate for the saddlebags she was wearing over her light green dress and stepped inside. Do you have a minute? I have all the time in the world for anything that doesn't involve budgets, shipments and line items, Maggie said with a chuckle. Erin froze in the process of sitting down in one of the pony-adapted chairs in Maggie's office. Ah, she said, then cleared her throat. Well, about shipments, Maggie sighed. What about shipments? Well, I may have just ordered a ton of stuff online, and used the address here as the shipping address. Maggie chuckled. That's fine, I told you that you could do that, remember? Erin nodded, looking uncomfortable. Yeah, though, this might be a bit more than you intended for when you made that offer. What do you mean? Maggie asked with a sinking feeling in her gut. Well, it may be easier if I just showed you. Erin pulled her own tablet out of her saddlebags with her teeth. After tapping a few times with a mouth-held stylus, she passed the tablet over to Maggie, who began flipping through various order confirmations. Ah, wow. Maggie let out a low whistle. This is kind of a lot of stuff. Yeah. Erin fidgeted in her chair for a moment. Is that okay? Yeah, it's fine. Can you send the order confirmations to my email? I'll put the mailroom on alert. One particular item caught Maggie's attention. A bulk order of Lego bricks. Erin blushed and cleared her throat. My new neighbor has the cutest little filly, she said by way of explanation. Maggie laughed, shaking her head as she passed the tablet back. Might be kind of tricky, taking them back apart by mouth, she pointed out. Then she laughed again at the dismayed look on Erin's face. I didn't think of that. Erin frowned and ran a hoof through her mane. Well, I suppose I'll still order them. Maybe she can figure out how to take them back apart with her magic. Oh, she's a unicorn. Yup. Erin grinned and perked back up. Her name is Dinky. I'm actually meeting her and her mother at the Royal Museum in a little bit. And then, we're all going to Cloudsdale. Oh, nice. Maggie said, straightening up in her chair. Make sure to take lots of pictures. Are you kidding? I'm probably going to fill up the storage on my tablet with Send them to me next week when the gateway opens back up, if you can. Maggie said. Oh, that reminds me. We're finally getting the contractors out there next weekend. They'll get the Wi-Fi working, get the solar tiles installed, and then leave the weekend after. Oh, cool, Erin said, her ears perking up. I know the mayor was concerned about it. You'll probably find my letter waiting for you when you get back to your house, asking you to get a place for them at the local inn. Oh, sure. I can do that. Pony beds might be a little on the short side, though. How many will be coming? 4 for the solar panels, and 6 for the Wi-Fi setup. And they'll be bringing air mattresses, so no worries there, Maggie said. You think you have enough bits on hand for that? Erin chewed her lower lip for a few seconds before nodding. Yeah, I should. Well, here, Maggie said, rummaging around in a desk drawer until she found a cloth bag. She passed it over to Erin, who took it in an upturned hoof. There's 8 bars and 100 bits in there. That should cover lodging and food. Try to get receipts for everything, if you can, so we can track it all. Got it, Erin said as she tucked the bit pouch into her saddlebags. I should probably get going. I'm not sure how long it will take me to get to the museum, and I don't want to be late. She snorted and stamped a hoof. I probably shouldn't have called my mom and just stuck to sending her an email, like I'd originally intended. I really didn't think we would talk that long. Maggie thought about how she would have felt just getting an email from one of her daughters after that daughter had moved to an entirely different world for a week. Well, knowing Lynn, I'm sure she preferred the call over the email. Moms never stop worrying about their kids, after all. Erin's ears flattened and she ducked her head sheepishly. Yeah, I suppose you're right. Well, I suppose I should get back to this budget, Maggie said, casting a loathing glance at her own tablet and the hateful budgetary analysis contained within. Don't forget to send those email confirmations to me. Got it, Erin said as she slid out of her chair. I'll get them to you before I go back across the gateway. Thanks, kiddo, Maggie said. They said the goodbyes. Maggie stared at the door of her office for a few seconds after Erin left, then sighed and picked up her tablet to begin once again trying to make heads or tails out of her third quarter budgetary requirements. *****. It was a small town in the middle of nowhere, so far north that there was some dispute if it was even inside the borders of Equestria. As far as the locals were concerned, it could go either way. When things were going well, then the town was independent and Equestria could mind its own business. When things were going poorly, which was more often than not these days, then the Equestrian government wasn't doing their jobs right. Some ponies would tell you that the name of the town was Trotter's Mill. Others would tell you that it was called Northreach. The one tavern in the town saw the occasional brawl because of this. In fact, brawls happened often enough that the proprietor of that tavern never bothered replacing the glass in the windows that got broken, instead installing sliding wooden shutters which were left open during business hours on the rare days when the weather was nice enough. The roads were deeply rutted with wagon tracks, left there after the rains had turned the streets to mud, which happened every spring. A brown-cloaked mare stepped carefully between the ruts, not wanting to twist an ankle. She had a long way to go, still, and an injury at this stage of her journey was unacceptable. She didn't know much about this town. In fact, she didn't know anything about it, other than the name that was on the map she purchased 3 towns back. The map had listed the town's name as Hay Junction, and it was a fortunate thing that she never mentioned that name to any pony who lived there. The resulting fight would likely have lasted for days. After all, there wasn't much else to do besides fight in this town once the day was done. Her plan, such as it was to find an inn to spend the night. She had a small bag of bits around her neck, and a larger bag secured firmly under her belly. This was a rough countryside, after all. Robbery was a definite possibility. With any luck, any thieves would be satisfied with the smaller bag of bits around her neck and not be bothered to search her. She'd worked hard for those bits. She wasn't about to let some dirty ruffian take them away. Her plan was interrupted by the crowd. There were about 12 of them gathered outside of a large notice board, grumbling and griping to each other as they eyed a young Pegasus attaching a notice to the board. She slowed to a halt, eyeing the ponies and occasional griffin warily from under her cowl. In her experience, a muttering crowd was rarely a good thing. Fortunately for her, the crowd's eye was focused on the young Pegasus stallion, who was dressed in a sash of midnight blue and silver. The mare recognized Princess Luna's colors when she saw them. Curiosity welled up and, against her better judgment, she approached the scene. The Pegasus was ignoring the crowd, though the way he was twitching his ears and ruffling his feathers indicated that he wasn't unaware of the mood. The large notice was being attached in the center of the board, the Pegasus beating the nails in with his steel-shod hoof instead of using a hammer. When he was done, he cast a wary eye over his shoulder, spread his wings, and launched himself into the air. The mare faded back into a convenient alleyway as the townsponies crowded around the sign. There was arguing, a little bit of shouting, and a scuffle or two. Eventually, every pony moved on, either to their homes or to the tavern, where they could complain loudly about the notice. The mare stepped out of her hiding place, glancing around to make sure Nopony was looking her way. It was clear. With a light step, she trotted up to the notice. It was on creamy white paper with a red scroll work border and lovely calligraphy. It was a pity that some pony had spat on it. She read the notice once, quickly. Then, surprised, she read it again more slowly. Princess Luna needs you. Do you have what it takes to join the Dream Guard? Generous pay with great benefits. An ancient school of magic, revived for the modern era. And taught by Princess Luna herself. Open to Earth ponies, Pegasi and unicorns of all backgrounds. Apply in person at Canterlot Palace or apply by mail at the address below. Only the best will be accepted. Do you have what it takes? Find out today. The bottom of the notice had the promised address, as well as Princess Luna's royal seal. The mare hummed uncertainly, considering her options. On the one hoof, she had a plan already. Granted, it was a plan that had dragged her halfway across Equestria, through tiny little ramshackle towns, and would soon continue into lands unknown, by which she meant unknown by any pony civilized, of course. On the other hoof, it was entirely possible that she was chasing a fantasy, and would find nothing at the end of her quest aside from bitter disappointment. That was assuming she managed to avoid the robbers, the wolves, the bears, and freezing to death in the bitter cold of a land that hadn't quite realized that it was supposed to be spring. This Dream Guard, though, a new school of magic, new opportunities, and a chance to be taught by a princess. The mare stood, frozen with indecision, in front of the notice board for a good 10 minutes. Finally, with a sigh, she let her head droop. Chasing power for power's sake was one thing, and she was even alright with the potential disappointment that would set in if it turned out she was only chasing shadows. But she was so very tired, already. The thought of continuing on through such an unpleasant course when a much more appealing opportunity presented itself was simply too much to bear. Besides, she could get a room in Canterlot that had actual hot running water for a bath. A light blue hoof reached up and pushed the cowl of her cloak back, revealing a silvery blue mane perched over a weary but determined face. I shall join this, DreamGuard, the mayor said, her voice resolute in spite of the exhaustion she felt. Just you wait, Twilight Sparkle. I will master this new magic. And then, you will have to acknowledge that the great and powerful Trixie is a mare to contend with. Hey. Shut up out there. Trixie jumped, letting out a startled squawk. She looked around and noticed, with great discomfort, that very nearly every window she could see had the face of a scowling pony or griffin staring out of it. Each and every one of them was focused on her. Trixie believed she should be going, she muttered, turning away from the notice board and starting to trot away. She heard a door slam open behind her, with haste. She magicked a smoke bomb out of her saddlebags and dropped it behind her as she broke into a run. And, as she galloped away from the town, she started laughing. Maybe this was a sign that her life was finally starting to turn around. This could be the start of great things, indeed, she decided. With another laugh, Trixie increased her speed, heading south, back towards Equestria, where, with any luck, her destiny awaited her. Author's notes. Yay, Trixie. Don't worry, this won't be her only appearance. She's got a pretty big part to play in this story. Not as much as the main six, of course, but she'll definitely be back. And, yes, this alters her story from Magic Jewel. Rather than continuing her quest for the Alicorn amulet, she's going to go to Canterlot and try out for the Dreamguard. For Applejack's scene, you can see what happens next from Big Mac's perspective in Sunflower, Side Projects, Red Apples Chapter 4. And now, some editing shenanigans. BP's editor's note. Imagination is a good thing during writing and editing, but sometimes it can backfire. I don't want to hear about you doing this again. You understand. You need sleep, and you can't shut yourself away for days to play with a new toy, no matter how fun it is. BP, bad thoughts. No, brain, hoopy, ooh, I didn't think of that connotation. Lichen, LMAO. Don't hate me, but I downloaded a copy of this doc to read in class. I burst out laughing and startled a few classmates. It was funnier still until my instructor started to get curious. Then it got awkward. Ekevo's editor's note. This deserves the light of the day, too. Brilliant point, now it's creepy. Not the whole Teletubby bunny thing. Ludicrous Lichen. Hated those things. The L4D2 mod gave me the willies.